I want to turn, though, and talk about the big contrast I want to make today. So over July 4th, in an astonishing, if it were a sentence, it'd be an oxymoron, like a socialist conference on July 4th, which is a celebration of freedom. But there was a socialist conference in America, I think it was in Chicago, over 4th of July weekend. And seriously, what a ridiculous oxymoron. The idea that people pursuing socialism would choose the July 4th holiday, although the truth is people who like socialism don't celebrate freedom, so I guess it actually makes a ton of sense. But there was a gentleman from the Heritage Foundation who went to the conference, and I think it was in Chicago, but he went to this conference, and he basically, this is a conference, a socialism conference, and he laid out some things I think are just world-class eye-opening for all of us who think, or we know anyone who thinks, that socialism just means being nicer and sharing. Socialism just means a little more generosity, a little bigger government assistance programs, a little bigger, check for amount of money allotted to food stamps, or a little bigger housing allowance. Socialism means the destruction of America. And I want to run through, this is just a socialist conference, these people who are pie in the sky, they want all this. To start with, the theme, the motto for the conference, this socialism conference over July 4th weekend was, here is the conference, the conference tagline: no borders, no bosses, no binaries. So we're going to go into this gentleman who from Heritage who went to it, kind of laid out some of the top points they made. I'm going to add a few more on. But I want you to see both what they say they stand for and how far along the path America seems to be already, or not just America as a country, but our kind of political culture in this country. Our political conversation in America is slowly embracing these radical ideas, and I want to run through them. Okay, just to start with, the first thing he talked about is understand these are people talking about serious socialism. They're not talking about can't we slightly increase food stamps. They're talking about the socialistic control over, as the traditional definition has been of socialism, the control over the means of production, controls over industries, businesses, control over the things in society that we in America have always understood to belong in the private sector. And so they have, part of it they have is just a sense of an attempt to paint capitalism or freedom or free markets as unfair, as kind of a bad news deal, as unfair to people. And so I want, as just one example of how they've begun to make headway, this radical left socialists in this country have started to make headway on selling this idea that capitalism isn't fair and somehow socialism would be. At Harvard this year, what the graduation exercises, one of the commencement speakers is named Rakesh Khurana, and he opened his class day speech. This is a guy speaking at Harvard's graduation. He opened it talking about the capitalist ethos, 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 the capitalist ethos, which he described as: we deserve to win because of our skill, our hard work, and our contributions. And this guy, who is a professor of business and sociology at Harvard, was describing this capitalist ethos that we deserve to win because of skill, hard work. He basically said he's mystified by that belief. He compared the American free enterprise system to the game of Monopoly. How, hey, you roll the dice, turns out you could land in jail, or you could land on, the boardwalk and win all the, whatever it is you win in Monopoly. He compared the capitalist system to a game of Monopoly. And the reason, and I could read many more of his quotes, but there are a lot of examples I want to go through springing out of this socialist conference. But the idea that a guy was actually savvy enough to be able to teach at Harvard and to be invited to make remarks at the commencement, this is a guy who is teaching students that there is no connection between hard work and reward. He went on to talk about how, in this country, we need to stop using words like deserved and deserving because they don't account for systemic inequities in our society. He urged listeners to junk the myth of the self-made person. He is down on the idea of the self-made person, down the idea of people being successful due to hard work. He's mocking the idea that success in America might lead, or hard work might lead to success. He's trying to sever the connection in the minds of these students between hard work and reward. This is a Socialist 101 goal. Cause people to ignore or fail to respond or fail to relate to the idea that hard work is rewarded in our society. And so he went on and on with ideas like that. He talked about the idea that chance plays a role in human affairs, and we have to work toward making a more sustainable, equitable society, blah, blah, blah. But he's teaching this to Harvard students as though this is the enlightened view, that don't be thinking that freedom matters, don't be thinking hard work matters. So that was the first thing from the Socialist Conference. Next thing from the Socialist Conference was, they're serious socialists. They really want to have wealth redistribution. They really want to sever the respect for capitalism and freedom and free markets. The next one was they were heavy into the issues of gender and identity politics. That was a huge thing. They plastered over the doors of all the restrooms in this conference center. Instead of men's room, ladies' room, they posted binary or some other word, essentially trying to ignore the reality that there are actually men and women in life. In reality, they have no connection to truth. So they did this at this conference, that everybody was supposed to be happy to use the binary bathrooms, the non-binary bathrooms, so any bathroom, whoever happens to be in here, and people were using them in all sorts of ways that might be uncomfortable to the person with average sensibilities. This caused me to leap to one story I want to share with you. This happens to be out of Canada, but there is a man in Canada. He is a transgender man, so he's what he is a biological male, who wants to be a woman. So he's saying, I'm a transgender woman, but he's a man. He's still biologically a man. He tried to use a waxing service. I'm going to be very discreet in the way I describe this, but there's a thing called the Brazilian waxing that women get. Waxing, a hair removal process, women sometimes get when they're going to go to the beach and wear very, very little bikinis. So they want hair not visible. So this male, and we have his picture, my happy producer Matt has him coming up, but this male showed up at a Canadian Brazilian wax place. This person right there is a guy. This is a guy pretending to be a woman. And he showed up at this Brazilian wax place, still being biologically, anatomically male, and asked to have a Brazilian wax. He wanted this woman owner to give him a Brazilian wax. And so the woman said, no, I'm not comfortable with that. So this guy, this male you're staring at here, is now suing, and he's actually ended up in a human rights court in Canada. And they described the first hearing they had, he got hysterical, yelling, raising his voice at the hearing that this was going to be just a grotesque violation, injustice. This will set a terrible pattern. If this man can't show up and get someone to give a woman to give him a Brazilian wax, which is designed for bathing or in the bathing suit bottom area. So where we are and this gender identity craziness is that the country of Canada actually had to take him seriously, listen to the complaint, rather than say, you know what, buddy, you're a guy, and this woman doesn't have to give you that waxing thing because she's not comfortable, and just because you want to pretend you're a woman doesn't mean everybody else has to join your pretend. You're allowed to dress as a woman, you're allowed to reassert your name, change your name, you're allowed as an adult to engage in surgery, whatever it is you want to do to try to actually transition to be a woman. But you're not entitled to drag the rest of sane society into your fantasy. You're a guy. But we are so far down the path of humoring this lack of truth, this idea that this is a man, he wants to be a woman, none of my business, fine, but he doesn't have the right to force his confusion and fantasy on everyone else. But the left is pushing this idea because they start with the idea truth doesn't exist, so therefore anyone, whoever this guy is, has the right to be whatever gender he thinks he is when he woke up that day. So that was one example of this craziness on gender politics being played out by the American left. Again, at this Socialist conference, I'm going to make a big point about this Socialist conference when we're all done. Another was the idea of race and racial politics. politics and racial identity. Huge, heavy emphasis on the idea of race being the defining factor of people's existence. You're not really an American, or you're not really a resident of the state of Texas or New York or California. You are your race. It is your identity. And that is the part of the American left's push to just both eviscerate the value and greatness of the idea of being an American, and also to endlessly divide America into racial categories, which they then pit against each other, or try to bind all these hyphenated groups together, these grievance groups together, and say, stand with us, we're the American left. All you grievance groups, we managed to get you so outraged that now you come along with us and we'll fix everything. As a really interesting example of how far the left has come with presenting this idea that your race is your identity, there was a Rasmussen poll that said 32% of Democrat voters polled, 32% of Democrat voters polled say it is racist for any white politician to criticize the political views of a politician of color. Let that sink in. They are not saying they might feel suspicious if a white politician criticized a politician of color, or they might question their motives. They're saying it's racist if you are a white politician to even ever question the views of a politician of color. Lots of other junk in there, but this is really insidious as the destruction of the idea of America, the idea of have an identity as an American, that people are so pilloried and squished into a silo the left is pushing you into, that's what you think, that even makes sense to you. The idea that people who happen to have white skin aren't allowed to think or say something that might be taken as critical of someone who happens to have black skin, that is the most racist, bizarre assumption of all. There are a lot of other ones, but I want to keep rolling along in what this Socialist conference talked about. They also, at this Socialist conference, view your people's support of open borders as a litmus test. If you support building the wall, border security, fixing immigration, getting clear on what the asylum standards are. If you support anything about cracking down on immigration, that is a litmus test, and you're a bad person. You're not playing the socialist game. And so I just want to mention a few other things, how far the left has come in planting the seed in our culture, and frankly, in the culture of countries in Central America whose citizens are coming up, flooding our borders, planted the seed that even having a border is impermissible, unacceptable. So, border agents in the great state of Texas, people, over this past weekend, there were people who were storming the people from Central America, coming across, storming the gates, trying to push their way into America to argue they have the right to be here because they want to be here, because they want to live in America. And it doesn't matter that we're a separate country, that we have laws, and we have borders, and we have policies, we have immigration policies, we have asylum policies. These border agents dealing with these 50 people who stormed the Rio Grande Bridge gate, and the border agents had to use tear gas to stop them, tear gas to push them back, to say, get out of here. And these migrants were physically abusive to the border agents, punching, kicking, and fighting. And I got to tell you, folks, the American left owns this problem. They have instilled the idea in people living in countries outside of America that not only is anyone welcome, that we have open, we have, very friendly scene. You have the right to come here. And they're being told, don't you think that someone can stop you? If you want to come to America, we're going to welcome you. Don't believe those crazy Border Patrol people ought to be able to stop you. You have the right to break our laws, the right to burst through our borders, because we said so, because borders don't matter. So this globalist mindset that just eviscerates the value of a border, the meaning of a border, is has been implanted not just in the minds of all the radical leftists who are constantly fighting Border Patrol and complaining about ICE and supporting these sanctuary cities. People in other countries have gotten this idea from the American left. You can just storm the border. Hey, come on in. You know, everything's free here. There's also, by the way, polling, good news polling. A majority of Americans want mass deportations of illegal aliens following the Congress's failure to solve the problem. We also had, just in this way in which we have illegal aliens in our country and we have the left protecting them, hiding them, in Los Angeles over the weekend, or last week, there was an arrest of 22 MS-13 gang members, an MS-13 being an El Salvadorian gang, a violent El Salvadorian gang in Los Angeles, arrest of 22 of them for committing heinous murders with machetes. Literally macheting people to death and cutting their hearts out physically. And this is in Los Angeles. 14 of those 22 illegal aliens. There's story after story after story, the crimes committed by illegal aliens, and yet we have the American public unsure whether or not we should be a little tougher on securing the border. We have a huge issue in North Carolina with illegal immigrants driving the child sex crime trade. That was a big story over the weekend. But I digress. Borders, back to our socialist conference. Understand, this is a socialist. This conduct is a result of the socialist mindset that's saying, no borders, we like globalism, doesn't matter who comes here, everybody come on in. They also had the Green movement and just the radical leftism of the radical environmentalists. You know, we have the Green New Deal, which I didn't bring a particular story about today, but the Freshmen 4, the squad, all support the Green New Deal. Most of the Democrats running as for president have either firmly come out in support of it or at least said some friendly, nice things about it. The Green New Deal is only a little bit about environmentalism. It is about environmentalism, but it's pretty much the leftist takeover of this country. And this is what was being touted and cheered at this socialist conference. They also had this notion, this guy's observation was, don't dismiss the socialists on the left as just a tiny little minority. Don't dismiss them as just the extreme to be ignored. It's a rising ethos, his term, rising ethos in mainstream Democrat thought. I could have told him that, but that is a true story. There's also just uber protection of anything related to Islam. Islam may not be criticized. Islam, you can't even point out true things about Islam, or else you have violated the socialist rules for America. This brings one last story up from this particular conference. You may have seen the story over the weekend, but a beauty contestant, a beauty queen, and we have her picture. She is actually really beautiful. Was removed by the Miss World America pageant. Removed, and look at her sweet face. First of all, she's really pretty. She's an Asian girl, and she's obviously a Trump supporter. And she was removed as the winner. I think it was Michigan. I don't know what state she was from, but removed by the Miss World pageant because she put on social media conservative ideas. Like she put, for example, that she thought it was wrong that in Islamic majority countries, women are forced to wear the hijab if they don't want to. She actually resisted when she was on her college campus, some girls trying to forcibly make her try on a hijab. And she said, I don't like the hijab thing. I think it's bad for women. I don't want to do it. These were the things, and she made several other comments on social media, these bringing up 2 points about the socialist intolerance of everybody else's views. One being, anything related to Islam is simply honored, period, full stop, cannot ever criticize no matter what happens. And then number 2, this idea we talked about a few days ago about progressive privilege. This young woman put things on her social media. They were not racist, but they're called that. If you even mention Islam, they're called racist. If you mention any topic that the left has not agreed with your view about, you are called a racist. And this is what happened to this young girl. So this beauty pageant, I wouldn't want her to be in the beauty pageant. That's how they're going to be. But they removed her for insensitive remarks. And basically, she's putting out what millions of Americans think. But the left-wing media that seems to control so much in this country, prevailed on the Miss Universe people, and they took away her her award. The other things in the Socialism Conference, you want to contrast the America of our future. They have massive forced wealth redistribution. That is the greatest thing ever. We have to talk about that another day. This whole idea of social justice, which means whatever the view is the left wants becomes social justice. They get to say what it is. So justice, like I work really hard, work my way up from low income to being successful, but I have to send all my money into Washington to pay other people who never want to work. That's not a social justice problem to the left. Social justice is only what they say it is. There's endless, it just goes on and on. And I want to close this discussion about the Socialist Conference with this point. If you step back from all of these different policy views that the left is embracing, the radical left is embracing at the Socialist Conference, you could make the argument that they are just factually unrelated. Why, for example, if you're an extreme environmentalist, if you're really, really worried about climate change, and so you really, really like the Green New Deal, why would that mean that you would have any particular position about border security? Why wouldn't you like border security? I mean, if all you're concerned about is the environment, what's wrong with border security? Or if you're really, really a radical LGBTQ advocate and you think that, people should get to change their gender every day and that you should be able to sue somebody if they won't agree with you and what gender you want, you're radically into that idea. What does that have to do with the environmental agenda? What does it have to do with the racial agenda? What does it have to do with the border agenda? And I'm making this point, I go on and on with all those comparisons, but drawing these analogies to make this point. The core that connects the socialist mindset in this country is utter hatred of Christianity, utter hatred of truth, utter hatred for the Western civilization values that built America. The thread that runs through all of these ideas is it's extreme godlessness. There's no God, there's no justice, there's no source of reward for hard labor, there's no meaning to America. It is the utter rejection of the very identity of America. The identity of America founded on the values we talk about on this show all the time. It is a rejection of the idea that the ideas of America matter. It's a rejection of the idea that there is such a thing as truth, and that there is right and wrong, that morality does exist. They're of course big into abortion. We didn't get off on that one today, but morality is to be rejected by the left. The whole notion of the American left distilled down is they hate the idea of America. They hate the founding values of America. They hate the founding Judeo-Christian ideas that informed the creation of America. They hate all of it. They work very hard on all these individual issues, but the uniting theme is just disdain for the idea that truth exists, that America was founded as a nation on Judeo-Christian values designed, and they are the reason for America's success and prosperity and stability and continuity. The left's ideas are the absolute destruction of America. And it's really important to get that point. It's nothing less. It is not fixing America. It's not improving America. It's not making America a little bit better. Okay, and these folks, the radical socialists at the conference, okay, I'll agree with you, they are radical. But the Democrat Party is not far behind them. And this is, in fact, what they stood for. I didn't read anything in all the reading about the Socialist Conference. I didn't read one thing that was inconsistent with the views taken by the squad, the freshman four, who are giving Trump such a hard time. This is exactly where they are. This is profoundly anti-American. This is why Trump is right to call them out for their anti-Americanism. He's right.